Good morning. Exactly 8 weeks ago today, we were gathered right here at MDTA headquarters. And we came together to stand up our response, our collective response to the Key Bridge collapse. And I remember standing here at this very spot. I remember looking over at the Patapsco River, and I remember seeing a container ship that is the length of 3 football fields. A container ship that is the weight of the Washington Monument, a container ship that, when people understand the scale of these containers, that each of those containers weighed about 1.5 to 2.5 tons. And I remember seeing the dolly stuck in the Patapsco River that had 4,000 of those container ships on it, and also with thousands of tons of steel from the Key Bridge sitting on top of it as well. That morning, we all experienced one of the worst tragedies our state has seen in recent history. We saw where a major artery of one of our country's busiest ports had collapsed, something that tens of thousands of workers relied on every single day to get to work, that tons of mangled steel sat at the bottom of the Patapsco River, where thousands of workers who relied on this port, who rely on this bridge, saw their place of work close. And we also knew that that morning, we realized that 6 people who were working on the bridge, 6 Marylanders, were now unaccounted for. That morning, we looked over there, and what we saw was, frankly, more questions than answers. What we saw was more unknowns than knowns. But now, 8 weeks later, we're standing. We're standing in the same spot. In the same spot where you can look over the Patapsco River, and we can see that not only have we removed thousands of tons of steel, but also that enormous container ship that we discussed is both refloated and cleared. A vessel that was omnipresent and looming on this horizon for weeks is now gone, and it's docked at the port. People said that it could take months to get to this point. This team got it done in a matter of weeks. Because this was an unprecedented tragedy, we're proud of the fact that this team has presented an unprecedented response. We saw unprecedented coordination across all parts of Unified Command. We saw unprecedented commitment from our first responders and our divers and our translators and our solvers. We saw unprecedented dedication from our private sector friends who pledged to not only not lay off their workers, but also pledged that they would return their business to Baltimore as soon as possible. We saw unprecedented partnership from our friends across all sectors of society, from the halls of the State House to mom and pop lunch counters over in Dundalk and over in Turner Station. We said that we would center our response on 4 directives: bring closure and comfort to the families who lost loved ones, to clear the full federal channel and fully reopen the port of Baltimore to vessel traffic, to support everyone affected by this crisis, from our workers to our businesses to our families, and to rebuild the Francis Scott Key Bridge. So we still have work to do. But here's what we can say. We've recovered all 6 victims and brought them home to their families. We've lifted over 10,000 tons of steel out of the water and refloated the dolly with no major injuries. What we said from the start, we lost 6 Marylanders that morning. We were committed to not losing any more. conducting all these operations with no major injuries. We've successfully partnered with leaders on both sides of the aisle in the State House to launch 4 different state programs to help workers and to help businesses. And I want to give a special shout out to the Department of Labor. I want to give a special shout out to the city of Baltimore and Baltimore County, because at a time when people were anticipating there could be massive job loss because of an unprecedented crisis, because of an unprecedented tragedy, these programs were stood up in weeks to support workers. This is an example of what it looks like when government is coordinated and when government is working. And despite high projections of loss, thankfully, because of the coordination, we did not see that. And we work with our congressional delegation to introduce bipartisan legislation to ensure the federal government covers 100% of the cost of rebuilding the Francis Scott Key Bridge in a 100% cost share agreement. Now, I want to be clear. These achievements are not preordained. It was not preordained that we would have had the ability to recover all 6 victims. It was not preordained that we would move as quickly and as safely as we have. It was not preordained that we'd be able to rally Democrats and Republicans and launch 4 different support programs within weeks. It was not preordained that we would have leaders in the White House and across Washington who were willing to partner with us. These milestones did not just happen. Change does not just happen. Change is made to happen. And this team made it happen. So I want to share my profound gratitude with each and every member of the Unified Command. To the Coast Guard, to the Army Corps of Engineers, to the Navy SUPSOLV and all of their partners, to the Maryland Transportation Authority Police, to the Maryland State Police, and to the Maryland Department of the Environment. This is what coordination looks like. And I'm so damn proud to be a part of this team. I want to thank all of our friends and partners inside and outside of every level of government, from the local level, from the city and the county, from the state level to the federal level. And I want to give 2 special acknowledgments. First, to President Biden and to the White House. My phone first rang from the White House, I believe a little after 3 o'clock in the morning. At that point, we saw they were already on it. And that's been the consistent level of communication and partnership that we've had with this White House and with this administration. And to them, we say deep and profound thank you. Thank you for being with us every step of the way. And in fact, just yesterday, we had a chance once again to speak with the White House, who've continued to pledge their support for the continued recovery and rebuilding of our efforts here in Baltimore. Second, I want to say thank you to my friend, Republican Chairman Sam Graves from Missouri. His committee held a hearing last week on the Key Bridge response, and we heard from both Democrats and Republicans about their support for rebuilding the Key Bridge with a 100% federal cost share. And I want to be clear, the American people are going to be made whole. But the reason this cost share is so important is just simply because it allows us to move with the speed and the certainty that this mission requires. Bipartisan momentum and bipartisan cooperation is not a talking point to us. It's a necessity. And it is something that is achievable, and it is something that is a hard-earned destination. We don't just talk about it. We do it. Our team will continue to be in contact with our federal partners to ensure that we can and we will get this done. And we've made enormous progress. And over the next week, we expect another 20 vessels and barges to come through the port's public terminals. But I do want to be very, very clear this morning. The mission's not over. The work is not done. We've said that we will bring all 4 directives to completion, and we will. Completion means making sure that these families get the care and the support that they need. Completion means opening the full 700-foot wide, 50-foot deep channel. Completion means making sure that none of our businesses or our workers fall through the cracks, and we fully reopen the vessel traffic to the port. Completion means coming together again to celebrate the reopening of the new Francis Scott Key Bridge. In this administration, we finish the work we started. That's our commitment. And I'm very moved by the fact that I can now look out over the Patapsco River and not see the Dolly anymore. It's a beautiful sight. And it shows that progress is still here. But I will not be satisfied until I can look over this same site and see the Francis Scott Key Bridge standing again. That's mission completion. So, every day, one of the things we've seen as I've had the honor of continuing to meet people every single day who prove what it means to be Maryland tough and Baltimore strong. And today, we're joined by Captain John Schellenberger and Captain Wesley Southworth, or Wes. They're both tugboat captains. Captain Schellenberger is a Maryland native, and he has worked at the tugging company McAllister for over 20 years. Captain Southworth was born and bred in Middle River. So this is personal. And he served with the U.S. Coast Guard before joining the tugging company Moran. And yesterday, Captain Schellenberger and Captain Southworth were out on the water at 7 a.m. to pull the Dolly out of this channel and to pull it back to the Seagirt Marine Terminal. This is their work, and they do it well. This is hard, it's demanding, it is 24/7, and when Maryland called, they answered. They're joined in the work by the extraordinary teams of McAllister and Moran, who have representatives here today. So I also want to give a huge, huge thank you also to our state pilots, who are led by Captain Eric Nielsen. And so to Captain Schellenberger, to Captain Southworth, thank you for being Maryland tough. Thank you for being Baltimore strong. We appreciate you more than you know. And by the way, we were out on the water. We actually first took over at 05 yesterday. It's a long day. But what was amazing was this. Even as the tugboats were pulling the Dolly out and the Dolly was being moved over to Seagirt, literally, as the Dolly was still on the move, Unified Command and the salvage team was already back in the water, clearing steel. The Chessie and the Gus still pulling tons of steel out of the water. The mission never stopped. The operations continued. That's this team. That's this commitment. That's this hunger to get it right. And we are so blessed to have our country's best here in Baltimore. They epitomize what it means to be Maryland tough and Baltimore strong. So I'm grateful for this team. I'm grateful for this push. We are going to keep working together. We are going to stay coordinated. We are going to continue to have an unprecedented response to an unprecedented crisis. in Maryland. We're going to get this done. So, with that, I'm now going to turn it over to Admiral Gilreath, representing Unified Command with a deep sense of gratitude and thanks. Bless you, Admiral. Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning.
First, I'd like to say thank you to the governor, to the elected officials, and most especially to the people of Maryland and the people in the community of Baltimore for your continued support of the Unified Command. That support and trust that you've shown the Unified Command, members of the Unified Command, have really led to the speed with which this Unified Command has worked. So I'm exceptionally proud of the members of the Unified Command that you see standing up here, as well as the people that they represent, the salvors, everybody, and the progress that they've made so far. So I'd like to give you an update on where we're at. First, our prayers remain with the families of the victims. Second, on restoring commerce to the Port of Baltimore, over the last 8 weeks, we've moved more than 500 commercial vessels through alternate channels into the Port of Baltimore. On the federal channel itself, we later today will reopen a 400-foot wide by 50-foot deep channel to 24/7 operations. We will continue working on the rest of the federal channel to get it to that 700-foot width, and we are still aiming for the end of May for completion of that. But work will continue to remove the remainder of the debris that's beneath that in that channel itself. On removal of the dolly, yesterday we were able to refloat the dolly and move the dolly back to a pier here in Baltimore, where we will continue work to remove bridge debris, damaged containers, and make temporary repairs to the dolly. So that was a major milestone for us yesterday. Really proud of the work that went into that and accomplishing that. Third, on removing the debris from the rest of the waterway, the state and their salvors continue to make excellent progress on that. You can no longer see really any steel above the water line in the areas outside the federal channel. And they are going to continue to work on those sections of the spans that are just north of and south of the channel. And they estimate that they're going to be complete with that sometime in June. So those are updates. Again, I'm really thankful, Governor, for your support, the trust that you've given us, and we thank you for everything you've done to ensure that this moved speedily. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Governor Moore, now that the dolly has been removed, I think the focus is now shifted to rebuilding the Francis Scott Key Bridge, as you mentioned there. Early estimates show, thank you, early estimates show that a new bridge could be built and reopened by 2028. Is that too optimistic given the number of delayed transportation projects across the country? And if I may, just your reaction to the NTSB preliminary report last week showing that power was lost multiple times just hours before the dolly left the port. Is the crew responsible, in your opinion, for leaving the port knowing that there were some issues on that ship?
Yeah, so on the NTSB, some of the findings from the NTSB, and we know it's a preliminary report. There's more that still the NTSB is still investigating, as with other entities are also still conducting investigations. But even the initial findings that we found, they're troubling. They're troubling because we know that what happened on March 26th should not have happened. And we've said from the very start that those who need to be held accountable for what happened on March 26th need to be held accountable for it in every way, shape, and form. And so we're working closely with our partners in the Attorney General's office. We understand that this is going to be a lengthy process, but the thing that we believe in is we believe in moving speedily, and we believe in full accountability. And we hope that both those things are going to come to bear. On the question of the timeline, it is aggressive. But that's the reason we've got to move fast. But I think the thing that we've continued to show, if you look at this operation, is that we can do big things. We can accomplish aggressive timelines. We just want to ensure that we have the partnership with Congress and the partnership with all the partners necessary in order to accomplish this in a speedy fashion. And that's the reason we continue to push for this 100% cost share, and we've been incredibly grateful for the level and the measure of bipartisan support that's happened for both this cost share and us to be able to move fast. Because we know that between insurance and litigation, Lloyd's of London indicated this will be the most expensive maritime tragedy in our nation's history. So the American people will be made whole. We're also focused on speed. We've got to do this on time and on budget. That's our commitment. And so we want to make sure that in order to do that, that's why the 100% cost share becomes so important, because it allows us to move fast, to move on time, and to move on budget. We know it's an aggressive timeline, but it's a timeline we plan on hitting.
Tasha McQueen, Afro News. Have Dolly ship workers been allowed to get off the ship and return home yet?
Yeah, now that we have the ship is refloated, they are now going to have the opportunity to be able to have time off of the ship. We know that it's going to be necessary and required that the Dolly is going to be here probably for about 4 to 6 weeks still. We still have roadway from the Key Bridge that's still sitting on top of the Dolly. So there's still very much going to be a process to be able to fully clear up the Dolly that is going to allow it to make its final journey, which is for it to go to the port of Norfolk. But in order to do that, we know that that not only is going to take a little bit of time, but also the support of the workers so they can complete their mission is going to be important as well.
Governor, how emotional was it for you as it was all happening? I mean, we were all here watching, but you were out there in the boat, and as those tugs started doing their thing, how emotional was it for you?
I remember that first morning when it happened and being able to look up and say, I didn't know what the Baltimore skyline looked like without the Key Bridge. I mean, the Key Bridge has been there since I've been born. I've crossed it countless times. And over the past almost 8 weeks, I've now become imprinted in my mind that I don't know what that looks like without the Dolly sitting right there. And so to be out there with this remarkable team, to be out there in the water, to watching these tugboat captains pulling the Dolly out, it was emotional. It was emotional because my immediate thoughts went back to these family members and the horror that night. That my immediate thoughts went back to these port workers who woke up that morning and were trying to figure out what is their livelihood now. That the immediate thought went back to the MDTA officers who that night ended up saving countless lives by stopping traffic on that bridge. Immediate thought went out to our divers who were out there literally within an hour working to save lives. Immediate thought goes to the private sector partners who, as we reached out to all of our various private sector partners, who said, we're not going anywhere. We're standing with you. We're not going to lay off our workers. We're going to make sure we bring our businesses back to the port and keep this as the most effective and most extraordinary port inside this country. That the immediate thought went back to the people who brought food and supplies to these first responders, the people part of Unified Command who've been working around the clock on this. And so it was a powerful morning. It's one that I'll never forget. But also, it was a reminder that while there were some that said this thing could take months, this team got it done in weeks. Historic speed. And it's just a very important reminder that partnership produces progress. And nothing else does.
Governor, I know there's been a look at protecting the Bay Bridge as well. Is there any update on any measures taken to protect the Bay Bridge or any other of the state's bridges? Yeah,
we've been going through, and actually we started our evaluation processes even prior to what happened with the Key Bridge, of just really looking at how are we protecting all of our state's critical infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our tunnels. I think they take on a special pronunciation now for our ability to be able to move fast on this issue. But we just need to make sure that every single critical infrastructure asset in our state is one that is protected, and the people of our state need to know and should know that they are safe, being able to maneuver on them. But I think we saw, and the reason that we have put so much of an emphasis on this is we see what happens when one of these core arteries is hit. You know, we see what that means to the Port of Baltimore, where, you know, there's 3 main pathways to get to the Port of Baltimore. You know, it's the Baltimore Harbor Tunnel, it's the Fort McHenry Tunnel, and it was the Key Bridge. And the challenge is that many of the goods that are going to the Port of Baltimore, particularly things that are either hazmat or things that or are fuel trucks, they can't go in the tunnels. And so we've seen what happens when one of our major arteries takes a significant hit. And so there has been and continues to be a focus for our state to make sure that our critical infrastructure is strong, that our critical infrastructure is secure. And I know it's not just happening in Maryland, because I've been in conversation with governors around the country who are very much going through the same process.
Governor, we know that the effort to support the families, you said, is a main priority. Can you talk about how they're doing? Any update on the families?
Yeah. You know, we have been in constant communication with the families. Believe me, now numbers, we have over 20 people that are assigned and working with family through various state agencies to include the remarkable work that our state police is doing. And I know that that one of the first things that we promised the families was that we would stop at nothing when it was a search and rescue mission to be able to work to rescue their family members. And when it turned into a recovery mission, our promise was the same, that we were going to stop at nothing to recover the members of the family members. And I remember conversations with the families where that was a major ask for them, where they just said, we want them back. We're thankful that this team has been able to bring that measure of closure to these families, to return all six family members to their family. But we also know that the support for their families, it doesn't stop there. This is going to be a long-time grieving process. It's going to be a long-time grieving process for our entire state, who knows that we stand with these family members every single day. But it's especially going to be a long-time grieving process for these family members. And so our consistent communication with them and being able to do what we can do to provide whatever closure that they need, that is going to be and will continue to be an ongoing process for our state.
All right, guys. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all.